one of our own will be speaking, Jelan Heidelberg. Jelan was a member of this club for several years. I'm not quite sure how long, do you know?
Hard to know because it was COVID when I started.
Okay.
3.5, 4 years? Yeah.
So, and now she's a member of Rotary Global Travelers E-Club. And I confessed I learned quite a bit about her by reading her bio. Starting in the late 1970s, she worked for many years as a systems engineer for IBM. She eventually switched to working virtually, first in Rochester and then headquarters. And in the last dozen years at IBM, she managed several software products and had the opportunity to travel worldwide. And that whetted her appetite for globetrotting, meeting and learning about other people. Since her retirement, she and her husband Jim have traveled the world. One of their latest adventures took them to Ethiopia, and that is that is what she is prepared to tell us about today. So welcome, Jelan.
Thank you.
Want to make sure that mic was
Oh,
This is the thing.
Wasn't on.
what?
The mic's
The
not
mic's
on.
not.
It
Is
is.
the mic
Is it
on?
on?
It is. We just, you just weren't,
okay.
yeah, we just need to get in it.
You'll have to get kind of close to that. Are you gonna walk around?
I might pick it up and walk.
Okay.
I'm not a very stationary speaker. And for those of you who are visitors, I'm no longer a member of this club because I'm a global traveler. And I missed so many meetings, and the Global Travelers E-Club is meant for people like me and my husband. We're both members because we meet virtually, and we do travel and do international service. Let me see how yeah,
You can just yank it out. It'll go.
You think
Got
so?
it. Yeah. Yeah. You got it. There you go.
And it's on?
Yep.
Okay, so in January of this year, 12 of us, 12 members of the Global Travelers E-Club went to Ethiopia. And it was a trip that I actually organized because it was a place I was interested in and I'd never been to. When we travel with Rotary, or at least when we travel with Rotary and the E-Club, we usually either try to visit a grant that has already happened to kind of see the results or see it in progress, or we're going as kind of a information kind of thing to look for the possibilities of grants, which was the case in this trip, that we didn't have any plan ahead of time in terms of what grant we might be looking at, but we had connections with local Rotary clubs, as we'll see, and found out a lot of interesting things. Ethiopia, we did a north loop and a south loop. So Addis Ababa is the capital of Ethiopia and it's kind of in the middle. The northern part of Ethiopia, as you can see from over here, had a lot of influence, even though it's fairly far from like Greece and Rome, it's very accessible by the Red Sea, because Eritrea or Eritrea, however you say that, used to be part of Ethiopia. So all of these ports were accessible from the Red Sea. So the Romans were there, the Greeks were there, the Phoenicians were there, the Persians were there. Ethiopia was never colonized. It was occupied once briefly by the Italians, but it's one of the few countries in Africa that was never colonized. So we did a north loop, which is the part of Ethiopia that has a lot of influence from other cultures, and then we did a south loop, which is much more, as you'll see from the pictures, much more, it's drier, it's nomadic people, it's not very developed at all. It was a challenging trip, probably the most challenging trip we've done. There's very little, especially in the south, there's not a lot of infrastructure. We had hotels, we had electricity usually. We had, we certainly couldn't drink the water. The roads were awful. So it was a challenging trip, but it was fascinating. But we talked about, our group talked about the F word, flexibility. Okay, let's see here. So just a little context. Physically, Ethiopia is about the size of Alaska in terms of geography. Population-wise, there are 129 million people in Ethiopia. So if you take our largest states and combine them, that's how many people there are in Ethiopia. Texas, Florida, California, New York, Pennsylvania. Add all those up and it's about 129 million people. In terms of density, it's closer to New York than Minnesota in terms of population density. So even though we were out in rural areas, we never went very far without seeing something that resembled a village or seeing people. There isn't a lot of truly empty space in Ethiopia. It is a very young country. 20% of the population is under 15. The median age is 18.9 years old. So a very, very young country. Partly because until recently, the life expectancy was quite low. It's gone up, so they're doing better. But the life expectancy used to be in the 40s. Now it's up in the 60s anyway. But and their birth rate's still quite high. If you know your demographics, what is it? 2.1 is the replacement rate, and we're even under that in the United States now, and they're at 4. And that's come down because I think they were not that long ago at more like 5.6. And it's a very, very poor country. In the rural areas, the poverty level is almost 80%. And you'll see the pictures, it's a very poor country. And even in the urban areas, it's almost 40%. And compare that with our poorest state, Mississippi, where it's 20%, so. Before we went, we made contact with the Rotary Club in the capital of Addis Ababa. It's a very, very well-established, wonderful club. And they arranged for us to visit a couple projects that they were involved with. So that was kind of our first day. The first place we visited was a school. And the school is in the northern part of Addis Ababa in a very poor area. It has about 1,600 students, typically 50 students to a classroom. And they're not all in class all the time because they don't have enough classrooms. So sometimes they're hanging out in the yard waiting for their turn to be in class. The poverty rate is very high in the neighborhood. About 30% of the kids have visible signs of malnutrition. So it's a very, very poor area of the city. And this club has been working on school nutrition projects, and I'll talk more about what that project looks like at the end, because that's what we're working with them on now. But they started before COVID, and they purchased, their idea is to put a commercial bakery in the school. So they can bake bread for the kids and then sell bread to the community to sustain the bakery. So they bought some of the commercial bakery equipment they bought before COVID, and then things kind of ground to a halt. So now they're eager to get it going again, and that's what we're working on with them.
How old are the kids?
Those kids, well, that's not, those are teachers, not students. The students are here. Let me get to the next page. You can see the kids. Kids are, it's K through 12. It's all year, and you can see they're just so excited to have us visit. I'm sure some of you have been to developing countries, and when you visit a school, the kids are just so excited. And because Ethiopia has had, between COVID and kind of a civil war, they've had very little tourism for about 6 years. So they haven't seen a lot of people who look like us and haven't had people coming to visit them. So they were so thrilled to have us there. We brought a suitcase full of school supplies for the school to share with the kids. You can see Jim's over there, my husband Jim's over there fist bumping with the kids. They're so excited. And look at their values that they're working on having as students develop. And I just think that's fabulous. So these kids are so poor, and yet they're working on honesty and justice and self-discipline and truth, and it's very cool.
Jelan, what language do they speak?
They speak,
Oh,
I'm gonna ask, they're trying to learn English. They're teaching English and they're trying to make English a requirement in the schools and really convert over to a lot of instruction in English. There are many native languages, but there's one, it's not Aramaic, but it's something like that. I can't remember the name of it. There's one commonly spoken language, but they're real, and I'll talk a little bit more about English education in a minute, but they're really trying very hard because I think that's an important part of developing their economy is to have widespread speaking of English. So they're working very hard on that. After we visited the school, they did a kind of a ceremony for us where they had bread and all sorts of, they roast coffee and then they kind of come around with the steam and have you sniff the coffee. We don't drink coffee, but I brought Ethiopian coffee home for our kids because they're all excited about it. So this is the bread. That's a loaf of bread. It's not Wonder Bread. It's injera. It's much healthier and nutritious than store-bought bread in the United States. So this is part of what they want to be able to bake, is the loaves of bread that look like that. And these are people, so that woman is one of the past presidents of the local club, and then some of these women are women who would be employees of the bakery if they get it up and going. Come on, there. So then we went and played tours for a while after, wait, oh, I missed a check. Did I go through two?
I think so.
Okay, another thing that we did was we visited a fistula hospital. I don't know if you know what fistula is. It is a really horrific side effect of childbirth. Occurs often with prolonged labor that should be a C-section, but they don't have the ability to do a C-section, or it could be very young mothers. Basically, you get a hole in your bladder. And so as a result of the labor, and then your bladder just leaks and leaks and leaks, and there's nothing they can do about it except surgery, which many of these women don't know about or don't have access to. So they just get kind of pushed aside in their village because they leak and they smell. And so they put them in some little hut someplace. It's awful. And usually these women have also lost their baby. So it's just a really horrible thing. It doesn't really exist in developed countries anymore because we do C-sections, because we know how, in the rare cases it occurs, we fix it right away. But it is a big problem in developing countries, and Ethiopia is one of them. So there is a hospital that has done a lot of work in this area. There is a doctor at the University of Minnesota who is an Ethiopian who's been here for a long time. And she's working with them, and they do education and surgical techniques and so on. So we visited this hospital as well. And one of our, so in Global Travelers, we have full members, and we have what we call associate members in our club, who are also members of another Rotary Club. So I was an associate member of Global Travelers for several years. Karen is an associate member of Global Travelers. Christine Martin, who is the president-elect of the St. Louis Park Club, the clubs that are combining, is also an associate member, and she's working on this. So you might be hearing from St. Louis Park in a while. It's taking longer to figure out what they're gonna do, but we're also working on a potential grant to help with some of the work that this hospital is doing. So that was our first day. After that, we went and played for a while. We went up, so you can see it. Addis is a smoggy city. Ethiopia is very high. We were the entire trip. I think we were above 6,000 feet. So it is it's not mountains like like the Alps or something, but it is the most mountainous country in Africa, and the whole country is high. But then there are higher places. So we went up and saw this church that was built in the late 1800s, and you could see their churches are shaped differently from ours. They're really interesting in terms of their shape. They're often like a pentagon or a hexagon. They don't look like our churches, but they're beautiful inside. And that is Monk, who talked to us a little bit about the church in Ethiopia. Ethiopia is a the predominant religion, which is I think about 53% is Orthodox, Ethiopian Orthodox, which is like Eastern Orthodox. There are also, in the south in particular, there are Muslims. There are some other, the Catholics, of course, and then there are, I don't know, people who practice kind of ancient native religions. But in the north, by far, the majority are Orthodox. And we got really lucky because they celebrated Epiphany while we were there, because their calendar is shifted from what ours is. So Epiphany in the United States is January 6th, I believe, and theirs was January 19th and 20th. And that happened to also fall on a weekend, so they just made it a whole thing. I mean, it's a big thing anyway. There were masses of people, tens of thousands. I have never seen anything like it. And they're in groups that have different costumes based on their sect and whatever. And they do processionals from wherever they are to where the kind of their version of the River Jordan is. So they just have these long processions, day long, and they sing and they dance, and they have these, they lay out red carpets, but they don't have enough red carpets, so then these guys roll them up and they go running to the front of the line to lay them down again, and we almost got knocked over by the red carpet guys. And we're there joining, so there's people who are part of it, and then there's thousands of people who are just tagging along, so that's some of us, so we kind of joined the throngs. It was just an amazing experience. Probably the closest thing here would be Mardi Gras or maybe Times Square on New Year's Eve, but this was religious, and it was really, really amazing. They're so happy and singing. Then we flew to a little town in the north called Bahir Dar. We did a little more flying than we would have done just because there was kind of a civil war going on, and there was a military presence in the north, and there were guerrillas in the north, so driving from city to city was a little dicey, so we didn't do that. But we went to this, so you can see this is where we were, and that looks like a little lake because Africa's so big, but it's actually a fairly large lake called Lake Tan. Lake Tan is the source of the Blue Nile. So there's the Blue Nile and the White Nile that flow in to become the Big Nile. Blue Nile is in Ethiopia is 1,500 miles long. Their water rights were decided in the 1950s, and Egypt got like 70%, and Sudan got 30%, and Ethiopia got 0%, and yet they have 1,500 miles of the Blue Nile in Ethiopia, and they're water-starved. So Egypt is a little worried that Ethiopia is going to decide to build a dam. So there are some small dams, but they haven't done a major like the dam in Egypt. So we'll see how all that goes, but that is a potential in the future for some conflict there. We took a boat ride. There are a bunch of island monasteries in this lake. So we took a boat and went out and visited a monastery, and this is inside the paintings that are incredibly preserved because these are 16th century churches. And the paintings on the walls were just amazing. And that was probably the nicest place we stayed. That was our hotel. And then we went on to a city called Gondar, and they're still celebrating because it's a long weekend. And they fill up this moat with water, and that's kind of symbolic baptism, but it's actually a bunch of adolescent boys jumping in the water and screaming. It was pretty fun. But there are so many people. You can see all the people lining it up. And then this is they call it the royal residence or royal enclosure that was built in the 17th century because they had been basically a nomadic people, and this king decided, or emperor decided, that he wanted to show the Europeans that he could be cool like they were. And so they built this amazing palace. So it was a step up. So as part of the celebrations, sisters or friends get similar costumes. So you can see here, they all have the same fabric here, they have the same fabric. This hairdo, they have these tiny little braids back to here, and then it's all frizzed out. And I was talking to one of them, it takes about 4 hours to do it. And I said, does it hurt? Oh yeah. hurts a lot. So it's just an amazing event for them to do this. And they have this little, I think they call it the honeymoon spot. So that's, some of you may recognize Melanie is our current president, and Mike DeLuca, who's very active in youth exchange. Those are two global travelers. Jim and I sat there too, but I put Melanie in Mike's group. Okay, this is another church that we visited, and again, you can see the interesting shape, and the that's eucalyptus. So the eucalyptus is not indigenous, but it was brought in and it's used as a wood for many different things. And again, the paintings on the inside are amazing. The other thing is, see that basket full of walking sticks? Their service, they don't have any chairs in the sanctuary, and the services can be several hours long. So those walking sticks, people just kind of lean on them to keep from, because there's no place to sit. So they do kind of sit on the ground some, but. And this is, we also visited a Jewish village. So there was a pretty large Jewish population in Ethiopia. And then as they started to have some issues in the late 20th century, there was a lot of discrimination, a lot of concern about the Jews in Ethiopia. So there was an international, kind of secret until after it was over, there were 2 different international projects with Israel, the United States, the UN, various organizations, and they airlifted 15,000 Jews out of Ethiopia. So basically there's no population left. We visited a kind of a commemorative village.
I think there's a movie about that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Would you recommend it? I would recommend it. It was pretty good. So we also went with Gondar. In Gondar, we visited another Rotary organization. They actually had a Rotary Club and a Rotaract Club. So those young men over there are all Rotaract members who are med students. And one of the projects they worked on was this incredible prosthetics lab workshop. Right in the hospital, they did almost like same-day prosthetics. So it was all legs and feet. So somebody would come in, they would get measured, they'd fabricate their prosthetic limb, and they'd come back maybe the next day, maybe they had to bake it, but they'd come back the next day and get their limb. Amazing. And I think they do them for $85 a piece. So they make a leg for $85, and there's partly because of the Civil War, because there's unexploded ordnance like there are other places, lot of loss of legs. So that was a cool project that Rotary group did, and they also in this hospital bought commercial laundry. Made a big difference because they were able to wash the sheets, wash the scrubs that the doctors wore and so on, and made a big difference in health outcomes for that. So in a very poor country, it's really amazing. They have a very vibrant Rotary community doing really good work. This is kind of the highlight. Why people go to Ethiopia is to visit what they call the rock-hewn churches, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. There are 11 churches that they built in 24 years, all in this one area. We visited 6 of them, I believe. And they're called rock-hewn. If you look at this one over here, they're not built, they're carved. So they're taking the stone away from around them in order to create them. And these were built, think about this, when they were built. They were built in the 12th and 13th century. So they were doing this with hammers and chisels and wheelbarrows. I mean, they had it's just really amazing. And you can see us sitting in front of it so you get a sense of how big it is. And this is the best preserved, but it was an amazing experience to see these churches. And think about what it was like to build them and haul away all that rock that they took from around those churches. And then we came back, so this was the North Loop. Then we came back to Addis, and we went to a meeting of the local Rotary Club, an amazing club. Really, such talented people, such warm and welcoming people, and very well organized. So we had a great meeting with them. And then we headed south. And we first went to a place called Arba Minch. long, long drive to get there, partly because the roads are just awful. And you can see we got out to walk for a while because we were tired of being on the bus, and wherever we went, we would end up with an entourage. We don't know where, I mean, we're in the middle of nowhere, and all of a sudden there's all these little kids around us, just wanting to walk next to us. It was like that all the time. We shared the road with cows and goats, which was partly why it was a long drive, because you had to wait till they got out of the way. Our vehicle had some challenges, and our driver had to fix them. So it was quite an amazing thing.
Hey, Jelan,
Yes?
on 2 slides back, I think you're exchanging banners up in the.
We are? Yeah.
Yeah, so I just,
Yep.
because there's some questions about these banners earlier, you know, from Lucas and,
Yes, yes, we were. We exchanged a Global Travelers banner, and then we had a couple associate members who had banners from their clubs as well. Yes, we did.
Thank you.
And then in Arbor Minch, this was really cool. Our Debbie Kornhauser, who lives in Plymouth, is one of our members, was friends with a guy named Tom on the left, who used to be a teacher here and is now an English teacher in Ethiopia, in this town called Arbor Minch. And they got in touch before we went, and he said, well, you know, how about if I bring some of my students to talk to you? So we arranged a dinner at the hotel, and there were 12 of us, and he brought maybe 15 students, and we spent the evening talking to them. It was great. And their English is really quite good. And we are now in the process of piloting a project in Global Travelers where we're going to be Zoom buddies with them. Actually, not Zoom, it will be WhatsApp, because they don't have Zoom. And they don't have laptops, they have phones. But we're going to try to get together with them a couple times a month, so we'll pair off and spend 30 minutes letting them practice their English, because they're at a stage where speaking with a native speaker is one of the best things that they can do. So we're pretty excited about that. We'll be doing it in the fall because their school's almost over. We're piloting now. And we also, there was this amazing guy who used to be the coach of the national gymnastics team, who just created this thing. He bought some property, he provided homes for homeless kids, and trained them to be acrobats. And so there's a bunch of kids who do these amazing acrobat performances. And they go to school too, so he's really getting them off the street, giving them something to do, giving them a sense of accomplishment and self-worth, and making a little bit of money. So it just was so impressive everywhere we went that people were kind of out of nothing creating stuff and making a difference. And this is visiting a village. You can see this is what they live in. That's kind of corrugated metal. And they, you know, they wear native clothes. They have, you know, they're keeping their culture. They don't have a lot of money. There's another village. They're nomadic, so they typically move villages every 5 to 7 years when they've exhausted the resources. Mostly what they do is they herd goats and cows. They grow a little bit of grain, but it's very, very dry. This was another village where that is not tattoos, that's paint. Some kind of paint that they paint their bodies. So each tribe had their own culture, their own language, their own just decoration that they had. And this is another tribe with another style of hut. And you can see the woman over on the lower right, and you know, there's not much in there. They have some pots and pans, a few clothes, a mat to sleep on. They have, none of these villages had any electricity, any water, any sanitation. I mean, it's like stepping back hundreds of years. As we came back north, we visited a village that was impressive and is, again, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's kind of built on a mountain and it's terraced, so they have different layers of how they live, and they built these between the layers to hold it up. You can see Jim standing in front of it so you can see how tall it is, because he's 6'1". So they have built these great big high stone walls between the various layers. And they actually grow a lot of crops. So this is a successful village. And that was the end. So coming back to this project. So I am in the process, along with a couple other people in our club, of writing a global grant based on what they've asked us to do. They want to build a commercial bakery in the school. They estimate that the first year they can feed about 300 kids, and yeah, I'm watching the time, and they can get to 800 kids in the second year, and their goal is to be self-sustaining within 9 months, because they'll sell some of what they produce in the neighborhood. So the goal, and that's a big highlight or a big important thing when you're doing a grant with Rotary, is we don't want it once and done. We want something that will continue, and they're working very hard to make sure that happens. I think the other key ingredient in having a successful grant is having a strong local club. You went through kind of the opposite of that, where we have really a strong club here that has done all the work and put together the needs assessment, done a lot of meeting with the community, making sure what they're doing is what the community wants, and coming up with measurements and things. So it feels really solid. Again, there are 1,600 students in the school, with 30% of them, at least malnourished. So that's who they're trying to feed. So they want to address food insecurity for sure. They also want to, this is an area where there are not a lot of jobs. There's not a lot of skills. So the other side of it is they want to train women to do this baking and to do the other aspects of what it takes to run a business. Have some of the kids, the older kids, be part-time employees to do delivery, to pick up supplies, those kinds of things. So it's an employment community development. So that's one of the challenges, is where are we going to slot it when we write the grant? Is it going to be education or community development?
Can you stay after a little bit for questions?
I sure can.
That'd be great. That's just tremendous, Jelan. That's, don't go away. Everyone, thank you
Oh,
for.
you mean I get more note cards?
Yes, you do get more note cards. Oh, you spoiled all the fun. But thank you. That was a tremendous presentation. And as a small token of our appreciation of your presentation, you've got some more note cards. So would you give her another round of applause? And if you rise, please, and follow with me on the four-way test of the things we think, say, and do. First.
Is it the truth?
Second.
Is it fair to all concerned?
Third.
Will it build goodwill and better friendships?
Fourth.
Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Fifth.
Have fun.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.